So, welcome to this painting tutorial, where I am about to embark on a painting journey where I am gonna put some paint on Anasta Malkorion, a vampire lord. She is a commemorative series mini, stunning, beautiful mini. She has been primed in matte black by Armor Painter and then from a Senator with a wraith bone, so kind of a really creamy, nice white here. I am starting to paint in her skin with Holy White speed paint. I am only thinning it down slightly here. It's kind of a subtle paint, so you don't really need to thin it down that much. After that, I am actually glazing the model with a... It's an older paint. It's like a really light blue, so you could probably pick whatever really light blue color you have available. So it's like a really light blue, and I'm mixing it 5 or 6 parts water, 1 part paint. So it's very subtle, but it will give this kind of vampiric dead blue sensation. I'm also doing something even further with glazing, but on the very final stages. So yeah, that's all there is to it. That's the glaze done, and I will now let that settle and dry before I continue with the skin. I'm now going to move on to the, not the red parts, but the like purple parts of her garments. I don't have a contrast paint that is purple, so I'm just mixing Ultramarines blue with Slaughter red. Pretty much 1-to-1 mix. It's going to have a really dark starting point here, but it will give a very good starting point to highlight from and work myself up to a lighter finish from. Yeah. Alright, so that's the cloth painted in, or the purple cloth painted in. I will now shade that with Target shade to just pick up some of those red tones visible on the box art on the cloth. It's a very subtle effect, but it will also kill off some of the very matte finish that you get from the previous color mix there. And now it's time to paint in all of the red parts. I'm using Slaughter red speed paint, but you could use Blood Angels red, you could use the new ball red, but anything goes really. But I really like this Slaughter paint. It's kind of a velvety, very nice finish to it that I really enjoy, and it's just very smooth and easy to paint with. So I really, and it covers slightly better than a regular contrast paint as well. So I just love this color. I am actually surprised that I haven't finished my bottle yet because I've used it so much. Yeah. So there's nothing really fancy about this stage. Just make sure not to have too much paint on your brush, I guess. No need to thin anything down. Just make sure not to hit any of the purple parts or the skin parts. So there is an argument to be made to maybe paint the robes first, I guess. So if you actually hit the skin, you could relayer all of it. Instead of what I kind of missed a couple of spots where I needed to kind of curate the skin. And once you've already done the like glazing I did with mistakes, it can be kind of tiresome to kind of heal all that stuff. So maybe do the garments first. It would be my advice. But yeah, if you are decently careful, it should be fine in any way, in any order really. Alright, so there's the red painted in, and as you can see it's a really nice finish just before any shading really. I will now shade it both with Target shade all over, but I will also use null into the deepest recesses as to have like 2 degrees of layers and kind of wet blend those. I don't want any like dry lines, but I want some darker shades that I would get if I only use Target shade. So. Alright, so that's both shades applied. It's looking quite shiny at this stage, but that will get fixed later on. I am now highlighting the skin with this frost color I mentioned earlier. You could use any, right, like really light blue. I think there's one called like Baroth blue or something like that that you could definitely use for the same kind of effect. But yeah, so all the raised areas really. Alright, so I'm now painting in all the gold parts with a Liberator Gold. I don't actually own a Liberator Gold, so I'm just mixing Retributor armor with Volcan metal, which is kind of the same thing. It's not really a big deal. I think that's a good thing to mention as well. Don't really stress it out if you don't have all the colors. You could always use something equivalent or almost the same, basically. And if you prefer like heavier gold of Retributor armor, go ahead, knock yourself out. But this stage includes the rib cage, which is more like a rib cage armor really, and the upper parts of the sword obviously, and a couple of trinkets. She has like a couple of armbands, bracelets I guess, and also a ring, and this trinket hanging from the rib cage armor on the front, as well as a necklace. Alright, so that's the gold done, and it's hardly visible here, but I actually painted in the eyes here as well. I did want to get to that before adding all the nitpicky little highlights to the face, and maybe do a mistake and have to like reshade all the stuff, so just wanted to get that done and out of the way. Now I am shading down the gold with Agrax Earth Shade. You could go Rakelan Flesh, you could go Gilliman Flesh, or this Fire Slayer Flesh, I think there's one called as well. So there's a lot of different shades you could use for gold, and you could use something like Nuln Oil or Basilicon as well if you want like more dirtier, grimier look. But I prefer Agrax or Rakelan most of the time. So yeah, nothing fancy really. Just make sure it doesn't pull too much. Alright, so that's the gold shaded. I am now painting in all of the regular metal parts. That's the beads hanging from her loincloth here. That's the buttons on one of her boots, which I actually forgot to paint, so I'm gonna do that off camera. And that's obviously also the sword. I think that's about it. I can't really remember if there was any other parts. I don't think so actually, so yeah, nothing fancy about this stage. Alright, so now it's time to shade the metal with Nuln Oil. Alright, so it's now time to paint in the fangs on her loincloth hanging from the beads, and the skeleton on the base in Skeleton Horde. I am now mixing Aethermatic Blue with Telazar Blue to paint in the trinkets that are blue that you can see in the box art. That's one of the trinkets hanging from her bracelet. That's two of the trinkets on her front, like one on the neck and one further down from the rib cage, and that's on both sides of the sword as well. So, time for the fun part. I'm gonna now start to highlight the model. I'm gonna start with the skin. I've already kind of had a head start there with the frost white. I'm now adding marrow white, but you could pick any white, like pure white color really, and add this as a second highlight. I'm gonna kind of add it more like from a top-down perspective, so I'm only like adding it to the top parts of the abdomen here, for example, and to the very edges of the model really. So yeah, nothing more than that really, so just go about in a very calm and orderly fashion and add this highlight around. So marrow white here to add the final highlights to the skin. Okay, so I'm now gonna make some highlights on the red parts. I'm starting in like 1 part Swarter, 1 part Slaughter Red, and kind of relayering the red, but not all the way down. As you can see on these parts, I'm kind of leaving the darker parts untouched by this second layer. as to not kill off too much of the recess shading done by the Togor Red Shade and the Null Oil. So relayering here with thin down Slaughter Red. And this will also kill off a lot of the sheen from the glossy shades. So while that dries, I'm doing the same thing with the purple parts. So if you're using this mix, I'm using Slaughter Red 1:1 mix with Ultramarine Blue and then water it down. So it's like half part water, half part that mix. And relayer the purple cloth as to kill off the sheen and bring the color up a bit. And in this stage I'm relayering the metals with the base paint really, so Liberator Gold or Retributor, whatever you used. And yeah, the same for the metal parts, so just make the top parts pop a bit. I think that's a very important stage, very easy one. So unless you want it super grim darky, I think you should invest time to relay your metals. And now that the red has dried, I am highlighting all the edges with Wild Rider red. So really take your time here. There's a lot of edges to these kind of clothy parts here, so make sure you don't miss anything, because it will have a super noticeable effect, even more so in real life than you can see on the model. Once I showcase it later on, it's very important, I think, and probably this stage you should invest the most time in just being super thorough with. And as a second highlight, inside the edges and at the peaks, I'm using Troll Slayer Orange as a spot highlight. I also went ahead and popped some yellow at the very edges, like a Flesh Kids yellow. But now it's time to highlight the purple parts. And this will be done using Sirius Purple. Serious business here. Yeah, basically the same thing as the red parts, right? So this is the first kind of a heavier highlight here, because the cloth is pretty dark in its current form, so don't be afraid to slab some decent amount of purple on the model here. Just hit all of the folds here, so yeah. Go about your business. So after consulting the box art, I actually saw that the inside of the purple cloth should be in a very much lighter color, which is like a gray bluish, but I didn't do it. So, but if you want to do it, you could probably use the same color as I'm using as my second highlight here, and I'm using rust gray to highlight the very peaks of the folds and yeah, some edges and stuff like that. So just inside the other highlight, use rust gray or any equivalent color. And here I'm adding that super light blue, the frost color I previously used to highlight the skin. Just put a little prick on each of the jewels. You could use a white if you want. I didn't want something as stark a contrast as that, but anything that contrasts the gems enough to do the trick, I think will have a nice effect. So it's not a super important stage, but it will lift the model to the next level, I think. So here I'm going a bit off rail, and so I'm thinking about this vampire skin, and I think there's a kind of green tint to it. My eyes might be deceiving it, but I want there to be both blue and kind of green in it, so I added a Way Watcher glaze here. But I didn't do it in its pure form because that would have made the model too green, even though it's a very subtle wash. But I added like 3 or 4 parts water here to just give that slight green sheen that is hardly visible to the camera, but I think it's definitely adds to the model. And I think as well, when you have done your highlights, and some places you can kind of feel like there is too sharp a line between the highlights, and then add a glaze afterwards can kind of tie everything together in a very nice way and smooth things out a bit. So although this stage is not crucial, I do think it's definitely worthwhile, and it's not a hard stage. I mean, technically it's very easy, so I think really consider it. So the main model is pretty much done now. I'm adding some Caradon granite foundation to the base and letting that dry before I add a dry brush of Administratum Grey, and then I paint in the rim with Abaddon Black, and that's basically it. So yeah. So there she is, Anasta Malkorion, in all her vampiric lordship and glory, the edgelord of edgelords, and so many edges on her robes. It was really quite a challenge to find all the highlights there, but I really enjoyed painting her. Nice little model with a lot of detail and character, especially. I love how the red and purple goes together with her pale skin and all the gold details and trinkets and stuff. So if you've enjoyed this painting video, if you like what I do here, please hit the like button, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell button so that you get notifications wherever and whenever we post new stuff. If it's battle reports, if it's Underworlds, if it's Kill Team, if it's Age of Sigmar, if it's any other stuff, make sure to not miss out. So without further ado, until next time, bye. Critical.